Hello, my name is Julian Miller, and I'm going to talk about evolving developmental neural networks to solve multiple problems. My aim here is to find a program for an artificial neuron that allows it to build a neural network that learns for itself how to solve multiple problems of many different types. So in other words, the long-term aim is general AI. Biological development is responsible for all learning in brains. We know that brains solve multiple problems without interference. And inside brains, neurons move, change, die, or replicate, and also dendrites and axons change, branch, shrink, and die. Learning is not just synaptic, but topological. In other words, you grow new stuff when you learn something. And learning happens in the lifetime of the individual. Despite this, almost all artificial neural network models do not have development in them. Their aim is to find a set of weights for fixed connections that give good performance. I call this the synaptic dogma. And in so doing, they suffer from catastrophic interference. So I devised a new model to try to tackle this, in which neurons are abstracted as a body, a soma, and a number of connections, dendrites. The whole collection of neurons and dendrites I call a brain. You'll see why later. There are two evolved programs, soma and dendrite, which when they are executed in some initial neurons, a brain grows. All neural variables are real valued in the interval -1 to 1, and the soma and dendrite programs are encoded and evolved using Cartesian genetic programming. So here's a picture for you. Some neurons provide the outputs that are dedicated to particular problems. So I've drawn them as red, green, and blue neurons. They're dedicated to one of three possible problems: green problem, red problem, blue problem. There are also non-output neurons, which are here shown in black. The problems have inputs, and they're locations where the data is supplied for that problem. And they're unique locations. So from this brain, this is the brain, traditional feed-forward neural networks can be extracted. And to do this, dendrites are assumed to connect to the nearest input or neuron on their left, and I refer to that as snapping. So here's an example for you. This dendrite, its nearest neuron or input on the left is this one, so it means that this snaps to that and makes a connection. So in that way, you can build a traditional neural network. The soma has three variables: bias, health, and position, but it's an X and Y position. And the neurons run in every neuron. So what does the soma program read? It reads a neuron type, it reads the neuron health, bias, and position, and it reads information about the dendrites attached to that neuron, the average dendrite health, weight, and position. It also reads a performance input, which I'll come on to. It outputs four variables corresponding to the four variables for the neuron, which are called updaters, and they're used to update the variables in this way. So if the updater is positive, the corresponding neuron variable is incremented by user-defined increments. If it's negative, then it's decremented by user-defined increments. Non-output neurons have a performance input, this one, equal to the average fitness of all problems at the previous epoch. I have lifetime learning, which I'll come on to. Output neurons have a performance input equal to the performance score on the problem they belong to, because they're devoted to particular problems. Neuron type is -1 for non-output neurons and 1 for output neurons. Now let's look at the dendrite. Dendrites have a health, weight, and position. The dendrite program is also run in every dendrite. The dendrite program reads information about the neuron, the parent neuron, its bias and position, and it reads information about itself, its health, weight, and position, and the position of its nearest neuron. It also reads a performance input, and it produces updated variables. And they are used to increment and decrement the dendrite variables' health, weight, and position in a similar way with user-defined increments. So rather like the soma, dendrites receive rewards depending on whether they're non-output neurons or output neurons. There are user-defined health thresholds for neurons and dendrites, and these determine whether a neuron or dendrite dies, changes, or replicates. If the health of a neuron is below a certain threshold, then it dies. If it's above a certain threshold, then it replicates, produces another neuron. If the health of a dendrite is below a certain threshold, it dies. However, to decide dendrite birth, I compare the health of the neuron, the host neuron, with a threshold. If there's no birth or death, the neuron or dendrite changes according to the updated values from the neuron program. Here's an overview of the fitness function. So there's an initial phase of development, pre-development, where there's no performance input. And then we enter the lifetime learning. So this develops a small neural network, a small brain. Then we go into the lifetime learning section, this epoch loop, and we run development again, possibly for a number of different number of steps. We extract, for each benchmark problem, we extract a neural network via snapping. We work out its fitness, and we work out a total fitness as well. And then then we average over the fitness of all the problems. And then we say if the total fitness is less than its previous value, the previous epoch, then break out, because we're looking for programs that continuously improve. What problems have we applied it to? We've applied it to these 4 problems: ball throwing, double pole balancing, 2 control problems, and 2 classification problems. So initially, you want to just test it on a single problem, so you can compare with other people's work. So here you see the results for those 4 problems. 17 of the runs produced a perfect pole balancing solution. 16 produced perfect ball throwing, and on the other problems it did quite well. How do I know it did quite well? Because there's a paper which looks at 179 machine learning techniques and variants and works out what the average performance on different benchmarks is. And this got a 0.61 on average for glass, and here I'm getting a better result. So it's better than average. And similarly with the diabetes, it's better than average performance across many machine learning techniques. I also look at how to evolve solutions that solve these problems. One method is incremental problem solving. Means I evolve on one problem, and then when the number of generations required is reached or it's perfect, then you move on to evolve 2 problems, and then you move on to evolve 3, and so on. As compared with evolving them all together at the same time, trying to get the best score on all 4 at the same time. Of course, I make sure the total number of generations used by the 2 techniques is the same. So here's the results. You can see that incremental problem solving works better than non-incremental for double pole and ball throwing. It's quite significant. In glass and diabetes, it's slightly less significant, but it's still significant. This shows that the test results are significantly different as well. Now, what about solving all 4 problems at once? I was using incremental problem solving. These are the results. So again, you can see that 14 of the runs produced a perfect pole balancer. However, only 1 of the runs produced a perfect ball throwing solution. And let's look at the fittest here. I found one solution that grew a brain, solved pole balancing, solved ball throwing, and got these scores on the 2 classification problems. Fairly mediocre on the classification problems. What do the networks look like? Well, actually, I've plotted here the extracted networks for a different evolutionary run and actually had a higher fitness overall. So this is the pole balancing solution. You can see it's reading 2 pole angles, cart position. I've colored neurons depending on whether they're shared across different problems. So if you look at this neuron here, it occurs in all of them. It's shared, it's used by all of them with exactly the same dendrite weights. These neurons here on the edges of these are all output neurons, so they're dedicated to the specific problem. So what I want to understand in the future and decrease is interference. Why is it occurring? I don't fully understand why it's there. Why are the development ANNs so small? They could be a lot bigger. I'm not so sure. There seems to be a bias towards small size. I'd like to increase the number of problems with graduated difficulty. Evolving developmental programs using GP, or any method really, to build ANNs is very exciting but very challenging. So that's why I need you. Please consider joining in this challenge in the future. Thank you very much.